Hello everyone, my name is Lucy Bardos and I'm a community project consultant. Welcome to the second video in my series, Stories, Opinions, and Things. So on this channel, I make a lot of sustainability and permaculture related content, but recently I felt the need to kind of branch out a little bit and just talk about some experiences from my own life that maybe aren't directly related to those topics. Just to share some of the thoughts that I have, some of the experiences I've had, just in case it might help someone, and also just kind of as a document for my own self. So I hope you enjoy. Today I want to talk about performance anxiety / stage fright, which is something that I've been dealing with since I was a teenager. And I just thought to share a bit about my experience with it and how I deal with it. So in my day-to-day life, I'm a community project consultant, and I also play music with a band. And both my job and my activities with the band require me to perform on stage or teach or speak in front of groups of people. And so I'm kind of confronted with my stage fright / performance anxiety on a regular basis. I have not found a way to get rid of it, and I've tried really hard, but I have found a few really good things that work to kind of manage it and to, over time, just feel more and more comfortable in a presenter's public speaking performer role. So going back to when this started for me, I think it was probably high school with exam anxiety, and it was kind of weird because I wasn't actually stressed out about the contents of the exam. I was stressed out about the atmosphere in the room, and I think this is because I'm a pretty sensitive individual. I'm really sensitive to other people's kind of emotional states. And what would happen is that if we had a test or an exam, the room would be really quiet, and this would make me so anxious. And when I get anxious, my tummy gets all rumbly, so everybody would be writing their exam and my stomach would start going like and I would just be mortified because you could hear it because everyone was so quiet, and that just made me more and more anxious. And so I couldn't even focus what was on the exam, and some of the consequences of this were that I would get grades that were lower than what my ability actually was. But also I just started making stuff up. Like I'd tell the teacher that I was feeling really sick, so they'd let me go home and then I could rewrite the test like on a different day when there was nobody in the room, and then I would be fine. So yeah, I wasn't actually mortified about what was on the exam. It was just the atmosphere of the room that made me super anxious. And this carried over into university, and so I had all these like things that I would do, kind of lie to my instructors saying I was sick or I couldn't make it, just so that I could write the exam on a different day in a different room, and just reiterating like I was a straight A student, so it really wasn't what was on the exam. And I didn't even think at that time to like go see a counselor or a medical professional and get a diagnosis and maybe have a note that would allow me to excuse myself from those situations. And then when I was in my early 20s, my first kind of career direction was as an English teacher. And I did this really intensive course for a month, teaching me how to be an English teacher with a group of students, and we were all really good friends. And so this course helped me to just feel more comfortable speaking in front of a group of people, and kind of more comfortable in having attention focused on me. I think the whole thing with performance anxiety, because you might not think of a link between exam anxiety and performance anxiety as necessarily being that strong, but for me the common tie was that the focus was on me, and I really didn't like that. But I also felt drawn to sharing knowledge and being a teacher. So through this TEFL course, so it's teaching English as a foreign language, I kind of was able to come into my own a little bit and just get that practice. Doing it in a friendly environment was a huge help for sure. And then I started to actually work as an English teacher. I did a few years of that, And that was a huge help for me, for sure. Like, it really boosted my confidence, and helped. Not that it made my performance anxiety go away. Like, every single time I would have a new class to teach, or I would walk into the room and all the eyes would go on to me, I would still feel like a panic feeling. But I think once you kind of get used to it, you're not that put off by the feeling, if that makes sense. Then I went back to school and I was getting my master's degree, and me and my husband had formed our first band, music band. And I was not someone who had been playing a musical instrument my whole life. I'd done a bit of drum lessons in my teenage years, but this time with my husband, I was picking up the guitar. And I was completely mortified with the idea of playing music in front of people. A, because it was a new skill for me. B, because it was a new, like, I had gotten used to teaching English, but this was completely new. And I was so terrified. And, he was like, well, if you want to be in the band, we got to perform. And I thought, okay, like, how can I get over this? Because there's kind of a different layer to it when you're performing music versus teaching or like writing an exam, where you have to like do this intricate skill, and if you mess up, it's a big deal. And at the beginning, it was just me and my husband in the band. And I just couldn't deal with it. And so during the 2 years that I was doing my master's degree, I got really lucky because we were part of a group of friends where like every second person was a musician, and we got all these awesome opportunities to perform in relatively low pressure environments. And this was, again, a huge help for me, like getting to kind of try performing, but not in front of a bunch of people, like a big intensive theater situation. I would have not been able to do it. So some of the ways that we performed was like at a Christmas market. We performed for one of the student organizations at the university. We performed for a Greenpeace dinner, like a volunteer dinner. We busked in the streets. What else did we do? We did a house concert. We also performed for a local elementary school, and we were actually on TV. We even got interviewed for a magazine. We were in a small university town, and so we were kind of like well known in terms of like, oh, you need a band? Call these guys. And it was really cool too, because even though the band was just me and my husband, we kind of became a collective where our friends who played different musical instruments or sang would join us for different opportunities. And we even got the chance to perform some of our songs live on our friend's radio station. And so just getting all these little forays into different performing situations was like such an amazing, I felt like I was in performance school in a way, because it just gave me a taste of all these different performance situations and that they're not that scary in the end. And so this was during my master's degree. And then when we moved and I started working about 3 years ago in the field that I'm now, which is community building and development, we formed a solid band with 4 members and started performing kind of more classical gigs, so restaurants and bars and music festivals and stuff like that, and still get really nervous. And every gig that's new, I'm like, oh my God. But I think all of those experiences in my university years really helped to prepare me for it. One thing that I struggle with still that I've not been able to get over is that my playing ability is not fully reflected when I perform, because if I'm nervous, it affects the tension in my hands, and I would say that I play at like 60 to 70% of my actual capability when we're performing. And that is something that I'm working on right now. And when people hear that, for my work, I have to talk in front of people, I have to give presentations to committees, I have to train like 100 volunteers at the same time, I have to communicate complex ideas in a pretty concise way. And, you know, when they hear that I do music, they're like, okay, but so you say you have performance anxiety, but literally every facet of your life involves performance. So how are you not freaking out all the time? And I think my response to that is I am freaking out all the time, but I just kind of embrace it and try to go with the flow. That's my biggest tip, is just to not worry about a single instance, to know that there's going to be some times where you just mess it up, but that people in general are nice. And that's the one thing, like, in my mind that I've learned over time, is that people in general are nice. Audiences in general are nice. And when you feel like you're surrounded by friends, then the pressure goes down. So that's one of my biggest tips, is to create a rapport with the audience. And if you can't actually talk to them, just pretend in your mind that the people who are sitting around you are just friends. This is a tip that was given to me by a performer friend of mine, and really, really works. You know, there's like those tips where you're supposed to pretend that everybody has underwear on their head or whatever. Well, for me, I pretend that everyone in the audience is a really good friend and they're just here supporting. One tip I do have specifically for people who are starting out maybe in music or in their own band for the first time is that it is really good to create that friendly rapport with the audience, but sometimes getting to that step is still too difficult. So at the beginning for me, like the first couple of songs, I kind of just like get into this zone where I'm in my own little bubble and I pretend nobody else exists. And I pretend that I'm just practicing with the band. And I find this like very specific mental state where it's a mixture of being in the moment, but also being a couple of steps ahead in the song in my mind. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, this part's coming up next. This part's coming up next. And once I get like 2 or 3 songs down without any major mistakes, then I kind of open up the bubble and invite the audience in, and I try to force myself to kind of look at people and smile and establish that connection. So yeah, step 1, bubble it. Step 2, establish the connection with the audience. One other technique that works for me in not a music performance scenario, but actually in like a teaching or classroom workshop type of scenario, is to really consciously design what the layout of the room is like. So for me personally, I actually really like, rather than having rows of people facing me and me standing in front of them, is to put myself on the same level if possible. So create a U or a circle and then put myself as part of that circle. So that sometimes means that I choose to sit rather than stand. Again, it's not always possible depending on the situation, but if I'm teaching like a workshop or a class on something, I usually sit and I am at eye level with everybody. And that just creates like this mental shift in my mind where I'm like, we're all here learning together, rather than the onus is on me to know everything and to like relay this information to people. Because I think a lot of people who have performance anxiety also have imposter syndrome, which is the feeling of not being knowledgeable enough or talented enough or good enough to be doing what you're doing, even though in many cases you are. And I know that's definitely something that I struggle with. And I have found that putting yourself on the equal kind of level physically with everybody who's in the space with you, just like, I don't know, it just makes it feel so much more comfortable. And I think it's actually more comfortable for students too. Actually, recently I was recruiting volunteers for a big project around homelessness that I'm working on, and I had to go and present in like 5 or 6 different university classrooms. And I noticed that the way that the students engaged with me in this little, it was a 5-minute presentation, really changed based on what the classrooms were set up like. And I kind of had a control for this because a lot of the classes were the same faculty and quite a similar student demographic. But one of the classes was set up in a circle and the other class was like a descending lecture theater. And I felt like when I was presenting the circle, people had so many questions and were so interested and engaged with me and asked you know, what the project was about, and just seemed so much more into what I was talking about. Whereas when I was presenting in the lecture style, everybody was really quiet and attentive, but they were much more hesitant to connect with me through questions and dialogue. And I just felt so much more comfortable in the circle situation. So it just kind of reaffirmed that this conscious classroom design really helps in those situations. And I think it even kind of goes beyond that in terms of the role of a teacher or facilitator. The study of pedagogy has also been shifting in recent years to people who are in teaching positions seeing themselves more as facilitators of knowledge and really valuing the existing knowledge of their students, rather than thinking of themselves as, you know, a purveyor of knowledge. You know, I'm not just giving you knowledge, I'm assisting in knowledge facilitation, I'm assisting learning. So I'm sorry if this video was kind of drawn out. I just kind of felt compelled to talk about this topic today. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this video, especially if you stuck around to the end. I do have quite a lot more planned in the future, and I'm really looking forward to making more videos for you.